Welcome to MassTransit Commute. This episode is about retry, and I'm going to start with a simple claim submission consumer. This consumer has a single message type, submit claim, and depending upon the number of retries, it's going to behave differently. So the first time a message comes through, it's going to reject the claim immediately with an exception. The second time through, it's going to reject the claim again with a different exception. And then on the final time through, it's going to actually complete and the consumer won't throw an exception. Now, obviously, if I were to just run this straight out of the box, it's going to put a message straight into the error queue. And you can see I've configured the consumer and I'm configuring the endpoints. And when I run it, that submit claim message that gets posted immediately fails out with an error. We can see the error in the actual log here. And if we go and look at RabbitMQ, we can see that it's created that claim submission error where it's put that message. To configure retry, I can do this a number of different ways. I can do it immediately within the consumer. I could say use message retry, and I could just say retry, and let's just say intervals of 2 at 500 milliseconds apart. If I run this again, what we'll see is that the message will actually error immediately. We'll see that in the log. We'll get a warning because it's going to retry it. It then does it the second time, and then the persistence pays off. We get the message, and you can see that the message has been consumed. It's all done, nothing to see here. So that's how we get retry in the message handler. The options, that's just one way to specify retry though. There are a couple of other ways that I could do it. Another option that I could do is I could use a consumer definition. So I've created a claim submission consumer definition. And what this is a class that can be registered along with the consumer. And in that, I can configure the receive endpoint for that consumer class. And in this case, I've put a use message retry block there. I can actually come in and tell it, oh, I only want to handle certain exceptions. So I can filter the exceptions that are handled by retry. And I can specify one of the retry policies. Now here I'm using interval, but there are a whole bunch of them. There are exponential, immediate, incremental, a variety to choose from, and they all auto-complete out, so you should see those. By putting the consumer definition on here, I can see it right away, and when I run it within the debugger and go back out and look at RabbitMQ, I can see that it caught the exception, handled it the same way, and the message is already processed as it should have been. Now let's say that I had only specified a single retry with that. Let's say that I only did a single interval of 500 milliseconds. Now remember, the consumer, it's only going to complete on that third attempt through. So now what happens is when it initially throws that exception, it's going to retry it, but then the retry is going to fail and you're going to see that error in the log. So at that point, the warning is promoted to an error and it actually faults that and moves it to the error queue as we would expect. And if I go in and look at that, I can see that there is actually a retry count header stored with that failed message. So I'm able to see that it was retried a certain number of times before it was moved to the error queue. One other thing that I'd like to show real quick, I showed two different ways. I showed with the definition and I showed the way you can do it with add consumer. You can also just configure a receive endpoint in here. So I've configured the receive endpoints using configure endpoints, and I have a separate video on that. But here I want to just add a couple of additional receive endpoints to show how the same message can be produced. So these receive endpoints, one with a single retry and one with a double retry, I'm configuring the same consumer on these endpoints, and I'm going to end up with 3 different queues for that same consumer. Now, you would only do this if you're really showing this off, but I'm publishing that same submit claim message, and all 3 consumers are going to receive it. So now if I go and look at RabbitMQ, I can see that I have a claim submission queue that is going to move that to the error. I have the claim submission with double retry, which isn't going to have any errors because it completed successfully. And I have that claim submission with single retry, and that has that message in there. You can see the same retry count. So just kind of showing how you could also configure a receive endpoint if you want to. I find configure endpoints super easy to use, so I would much rather use the definition style, the claim submission consumer definition, and then be able to go into that definition and adjust that message retry as shown. So that's how you do retry. We'll catch you next time.